welcome to the introduction to psychometric role modeling. This is a tool that I've been using for many years without a name for it, without even maybe realizing I was doing it. Because before I understood functions, I understood that there were people that could do things more easily than I could. And I just logically began trying to teach myself how to do the things that they did. It may be a more direct or less direct route for you to accomplish those things, but I present it as a set of training wheels for function development that I sort of backed into accidentally. I became aware that I've been doing this as part of a conversation I had with a very dear friend of mine who is an ENTP, and we meet about once a week, maybe every other week, sometimes more or less, discussing psychometric things, discussing theological things, and how to apply those to problem solving, how to applying those to personal growth. If you don't have, and I'm speaking primarily to intuitives that are interested in psychometric science, if you don't have a good friend you can talk to about big existential and psychometric things, I know it's not always easy to make specific kinds of friends, the friends that provide a specific benefit in your life. But having a friend who is a similar but different kind of intuitive that is willing to sit down for 2 or 3 or 4 hours over a coffee or some meat and discuss these things is invaluable, because it is through this conversation I became aware that I have a specific tool for function development that I've been using for years without a name for it or even realizing that I had created this. So my dear friend, who is an ENTP, has issues with extroverted feeling. Instead of it being a strength, it has become a weakness. He was raised in an environment where one of the people raising him had a very strong FE, but it's tuned toward indecision. It's tuned toward fear. It's tuned toward procrastination about major life events. And I believe that in a strong, healthy ENTP, extroverted feeling forms a strength that bolsters all of that utilitarian thinking and tool use with a sense of compassion for fellow man, rather than a sense of fear of offending people, rather than a sense of fear of decision making, rather than abulia. So I began, without even thinking about it, referencing my own function development tool. And I began thinking, well, your extroverted feeling has been formed by a maladaptive example of extroverted feeling. The solution would be to retrain it with a pro-adaptive, a you-adaptive example of extroverted feeling. So the challenge becomes for an ENTP, where is there a human example of someone with strong, probably primary extroverted feeling, like an ENFJ, an ESFJ, whose values and accomplishments are ones that an ENTP would respect enough to want to emulate? And so we had a conversation about that. So who would those people be, and how would you rewrite the programming of your own third function extroverted feeling with this alternate example? Because the previous example, and not to disrespect this person at all, because raising a human being is hard, and even the very best humans make mistakes and leave little programming errors in the people they tried to raise up, right? Some of you had outstanding parents, and yet you can say to yourself, yeah, right there was a terrible example. Had to go find an alternate example. Had to go learn something different because this example led me to crash personally or professionally or biologically, right? That's not anything new. So in selecting this person, he was selecting a psychometric role model. Now what that is an example you pick of someone of that function that you want to grow in who is an example of that function, which is hard for you, that is doing things that you can actually relate to, you can actually admire. Now here becomes the challenge, because these are functions that often, they're difficult because they go against our type. They go against our quadrant. And even some of the weakness that is created has to do with being raised by a cross-quadrant parent, one of them. That can create massive, just, unless there's great maturity in both parties, a sense of trying to repair what is normal about that person, because whether you are a creationist, which I am, or an evolutionist, which some of you are, the sense that how I am is right and how you are is wrong can be a great human snare to our thinking. That is, I'm naturally this way, my kid's supposed to be like this too. And then, rather than trying to discern the design of God in that person, you say, I'm going to root out the parts that don't make sense to me, and I'm going to try and replace it with the things that make sense to me. You can see an inherent danger in that if there is such a thing as inborn human personality. So I made some suggestions, Here's some historical extroverted feelers, and I want you to say to yourself, do I respect these people? Does their version of extroverted feeling resonate within me? Have they accomplished things that I respect and would want to emulate? Because that's the end result of emulating the thoughts and words of those you admire, is you end up into imitating their actions, and those become your habit, those become part of your personality. That's basic human development thinking, right? And the ones I mentioned were Martin Luther King, or Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Teddy Roosevelt, and Gandhi. Now, the first two are primary extroverted feelers. I believe that Gandhi is a secondary extroverted feeler. And the idea is you pick ones that you feel like you can respect and would willingly emulate, and then you never get to know these people personally because most of them are dead. Most of us will not have the opportunity to be personally mentored by these people, and often the resolve and autonomy of an NT makes that a weird idea anyway. There's a great difficulty to one-on-one mentoring with a person whose self-concept words include autonomy. Nonetheless, you immerse yourself in that person's words. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has a lot of video, a lot of books, and my favorite quotes. Lots of quotes about his beliefs and his thinking that someone can immerse themselves into a point of eventually saying, I've got a working knowledge of how this man thought, working knowledge of what this man would say in this situation. And so we can apply a version of, I know there used to be an armband, and I have mixed feelings about religious virtue signaling. I am a Christian. Virtue signaling makes me feel creeped out. That is, if it wasn't true about me without the t-shirt or the armband, then what makes it you so sure it's true about me now that I've put the external thing on? Nonetheless, there used to be a armband that said WWJD. What would Jesus do? The idea was, how do I think in this situation, applying the Word of God to what would the Jesus perspective be? So the question in psychometric role modeling becomes, what would this role model do? If I feel like I've studied enough of Dr. King that in the situation where I know extroverted feeling is the tool that is best used to it, best adapted to serve functionally in this situation, and I want to use his as training wheels, I then say to myself, what would Dr. King do? Well, we know, for instance, he understood on a deep theological level that humans are one race. Humans are one race. Race is an unsubstantiatable scientific concept. It's an imaginary, cretological statement, cretological quasi-fact. You are genetically, if you're sitting next to someone a different color than you, more similar to them than you are to your own sibling. You are genetically very, very similar to every other human being. Now, culture is absolutely provable. You can come up with 100 ways that white Americans are culturally different than black Americans, or Puerto Rican Americans, or Samoan Americans. But you cannot prove to me that we are genetically different. You cannot prove to me we're anything other than children of God. So King understood this and was firmly rooted in an idea that humans were all made in God's image. Could not be swayed to the left or right on the idea that any functional society had to abandon racist practices because they come from the devil. Understand that. Racism, or even the notion that humans can be distinguished by race, comes from hell. Furthermore, I promoted to him the idea that he could be thinking about an SI role model because he was raised by an ISFJ. And somehow, the idea that normal behavior is indecision, normal behavior is weakness and fear, comes from traditions you're taught. So I said, let's identify a primary introverted sensor who you can really respect and you could really honor and admire. And the one I suggested was Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is one of the few ISTJs who has written lots of books and told us about what he's thinking, because most of ISTJ behavior is manifest through action and through upholding traditions and silence. Unless you have one as a parent, you're not going to get much of their distilled wisdom. He's a man of specific habits that are about avoiding dumb mistakes. Here's a really important one. Don't invest in anything for 5 minutes that you wouldn't be comfortable with investing in for, like he said, 20 years, 30 years. So the idea of long-term, stable, I made a choice in this investment or this life choice and sticking with it for the long haul is a value that I think the most intellectual NT can get behind. Figure out something you truly believe in. Attach yourself to it and follow it in a straight line. I'm an INTJ. I don't agree with a lot of things that ISTJs think. But that's a perfectly logical statement. If something is really true, its value will be expressed in the long-term commitment to it, right? So I want to share with you about psychometric role modeling, and I'm going to share with you the role models that I have for each of the 8 functions in the subsequent videos. I hope that you have been intrigued and blessed and equipped to better increase your arsenal of tools for developing your psychometric functions. Have a great day.